didn't cry at the venue. I thought I would. I'd rehearsed that moment in my head so many times during the 40-minute drive, my hands shaking on the wheel, my daughter asleep in her car seat, my son asking me every 5 minutes why we were going to Uncle Theo's big party. I thought when I finally saw the banner above the entrance, when I finally pulled into that gravel lot and smelled the catered food from 50 feet away, something would break open in me. But it didn't. I just turned the car around and drove home. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not just the day, everything. Let me back up, because if I just tell you the ending, you'll think I'm exaggerating. People always think I'm exaggerating. My brother Theo is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, that gap felt enormous. He was the baby, the charmer, the one who could walk into any room and make everyone laugh within 30 seconds. I adored him. That's the part that makes all of this so hard to say out loud. I genuinely adored my little brother. Our dad left when Theo was 2, which meant I grew up watching our mom stretch one paycheck across an entire month. I learned to cook at 9 because mom works doubles on Fridays and someone had to feed Theo. I helped him with homework while simultaneously doing my own. I taught him to ride a bike in the Kmart parking lot on a Saturday morning because there was no one else to do it. He was mine as much as he was hers, in the way that only happens when a family is held together by necessity and love in equal parts. When I was 22, I married my husband, Scott. He was steady and kind in the way that some people just are, not performing it, just built that way. We had our son Max in our 2nd year of marriage and our daughter Penny 2 years after. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Scott was a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm. I did bookkeeping part-time from home. We had a mortgage we could actually afford, a savings account that wasn't a joke, and a life that felt, for the first time in my memory, stable. Then Scott was diagnosed, pancreatic cancer, stage 3. He was 31 years old. I won't detail that year because that year doesn't belong in this story. It belongs somewhere else, somewhere private. What I will tell you is that 14 months after his diagnosis, I became a widow with 2 children under 5 and a life insurance payout sitting in a bank account that felt less like money and more like evidence. Evidence that he was gone, evidence that I was alone, evidence that everything I'd built with another person was now just mine to carry. Theo called the day after the funeral. He was genuinely devastated. I believed that then, and I believe it now. He flew in from Denver, sat on my couch for 4 days, cried with me, helped me sort through Scott's things. For a while, I thought grief had made us closer than we'd ever been. What I didn't notice, because I was drowning, was that something had shifted. It started small. Theo mentioned casually that his lease was ending and things were tight. I sent him $800 without a second thought. Then his car needed work, $1,200. Then he was between jobs for 3 months, and I covered his phone bill, his utilities. A credit card payment, he said, was just this once. Each individual thing felt like nothing. A sister helping her brother. What else was I supposed to do? The requests got larger as I got steadier. By the time I'd found my footing, Max in kindergarten, Penny in preschool, me back to full-time bookkeeping, Theo had what I can only describe as a finely tuned sense of when I had room to give. He never asked when I was clearly struggling. He waited. And then he asked, big. The business plan came about 18 months after Scott died. Theo had been doing woodworking as a hobby for years. He was genuinely talented. I want to be clear about that. He made furniture, custom shelving, decorative pieces. He wanted to open a workshop/showroom in Denver. He found a location, had a lease ready, had suppliers lined up. What he needed, he said, was startup capital. He needed $45,000. I want to tell you, I hesitated. I want to tell you that some protective instinct fired and I said no immediately. But I didn't. I sat with it for 2 weeks. I ran the numbers. I told myself this was an investment in my brother's future, and then I said yes. The money came from Scott's life insurance. I knew that. I said it out loud to myself when I transferred it. This is Scott's money. This is the money that was supposed to raise our children. And I did it anyway, because Theo was family. Because I was raised to believe family came first. Because somewhere in my grief-fogged brain, making Theo's dream happen felt like something I could actually do when there was so much I couldn't. I had one condition. I needed to be a silent co-signer on the business lease. My name on the paperwork. My accountant explained it to me. If my name was on the lease and the registered business documents, I had legal standing if anything went sideways. Theo agreed without hesitation. We signed everything together over a video call with his real estate agent and my accountant on the line. The first year seemed fine. Theo sent updates, photos of the space, photos of finished pieces, a few small write-ups in local Denver lifestyle blogs. He paid back $8,000 of the principal, slowly but consistently. I visited twice with the kids. Max loved the sawdust smell. Penny kept touching everything. I felt good about it. I let myself feel good about it. The second year, the payments slowed. Theo had a new girlfriend, Simone. I didn't dislike her immediately. I want to be fair. She was polished and certain in the way that some people are. The kind of person who always has an opinion about how things should be done and isn't shy about sharing it. She came to Denver with Theo for Christmas that year. She spent most of the visit rearranging my kitchen while offering me unsolicited thoughts on my money blocks and why I was probably keeping myself stuck in a bookkeeping job when I clearly had more potential. I smiled and changed the subject. Theo laughed like it was charming. The engagement announcement came in March. They'd been together 8 months. I told Theo I was happy for him and I meant it mostly. I just wanted him to be sure. He told me he'd never been more sure of anything. Within a week of the engagement, Simone called me directly. She wanted a specific venue, a converted estate property outside Fort Collins. She'd already toured it. The all-inclusive wedding package, she explained, was $60,000. She and Theo had mapped out what they could contribute, $15,000 between them, stretched thin. She was wondering, she said, with a kind of studied delicacy that made my skin prickle, whether I might be in a position to cover the remainder. I said I needed to think about it. I called Theo that same evening. I asked him directly, "Did you know she was calling me?" He said yes. I asked him if this was something he actually wanted, or something she'd decided. He got quiet in a way that told me everything, and then he said, "She really has her heart set on it, and I just want her to be happy. You know how much this family has always meant to you. You've always been the one who holds us together." That sentence. I've turned it over in my head 100 times since. You've always been the one who holds us together. Even now, it makes me tired in my bones. I said I'd think about it. My mom called 2 days later. She didn't waste time. She told me that Theo deserved a beautiful wedding after everything he'd been through, that Simone was going to be wonderful for him, that I had the means to give him this, and that Scott would have wanted me to be generous with his children's future. She actually said that Scott, my dead husband, would have wanted me to fund my brother's fiancée's dream wedding. I should have said no then. I know that now. I didn't say no. I said yes to $45,000, not $60,000. I told them I'd cover the venue deposit and the catering contract, both of which would go through me, my card, my name on the agreements. I told Theo this explicitly. I am the contracting party on both of these. I said it 3 times in 3 different conversations. He said yes every time in 3 different conversations. He said yes every time. Even Simone, on a follow-up call, said, "Of course we completely understand." What I did not say, because I didn't think I needed to, was what would happen if I needed to pull the contracts. I should have said it anyway. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in June at a property called Larkspur Ridge, about an hour north of Denver. I made the drive with Max and Penny the morning of, planning to arrive 2 hours before the ceremony. Max was 7 by then, old enough to be excited. Wearing a clip-on tie he kept adjusting in the back seat. Penny was 5, in a yellow dress she'd picked herself. her hair in 2 braids she'd asked me to redo 4 times that morning until they were exactly even. I remember that detail about the braids. I remember it because of what happened 40 minutes later. The property had a gated entrance with a staffed check-in table. I pulled up, gave my name, smiled at the woman with the clipboard. She looked at the list, looked at me, looked at the back seat where my children were visible through the window, and her expression went careful in a way that made my stomach drop. She said, "I'm going to need to check with the coordinator." She stepped away, spoke quietly into a radio. Another woman came. She introduced herself as the venue's day of coordinator. She told me, very professionally, that there had been a guest restriction added to the file that morning by the bride. I said, "I'm sorry, what kind of restriction?" She hesitated. Then she turned the clipboard toward me. There was a printed sheet. At the top it said, "Restricted guest list, added 6/14. Below it were 2 entries. Max's full name, Penny's full name. Next to each name was a typed note, "Not permitted on premises." Per bride's instruction. I stared at that paper for what felt like a full minute. I said, "Those are my children," the coordinator said. "I understand. I'm so sorry. I'm not able to override a bride's instruction on her wedding day." I looked at Max in the back seat. He was watching me with his clip-on tie crooked. Penny had fallen asleep against the window. Neither of them could hear this conversation. I took a photo of that paper. I said thank you to the coordinator in a voice I didn't recognize as mine. I walked back to my car, buckled my seatbelt, and pulled out of the entrance without a word. I did not cry. I drove about a quarter-mile down the road, and I pulled over and I sat there for maybe 3 minutes with my hands in my lap, looking at nothing. Max asked if we were going to the party. I told him there was a change of plans and we'd do something fun instead. He accepted this with the trust that 7-year-olds extend to their mothers when nothing has broken that trust yet. And I felt something in my chest crack clean in half. Then I picked up my phone. I called my accountant first, not because he's a lawyer, but because he's thorough, and he knows contracts, and he was already familiar with both the venue agreement and the catering contract. I told him what had happened in about 90 seconds. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're the contracting party on both." I said, "Yes." He said, "And the venue? You have the original agreement." I had it in my email. I pulled it up right there on the side of the road. Children in the back seat. Yellow dress visible in the mirror. The venue contract had a specific clause, standard in high-end event spaces in Colorado, that gave the contracting party the right to terminate the agreement with full refund if the event was materially altered without the contracting party's consent. Adding a guest restriction that applied to the contracting party's immediate family, my accountant said carefully, could absolutely be argued as a material alteration, especially since I had documentation, that photo of the restricted guest sheet, time-stamped, showing it was added the morning of the event. I asked him what I should do, he said, call the venue's general manager, not the day of coordinator, the GM. Tell them you're the contracting party and you're invoking the termination clause. I sat with that for exactly 30 seconds. I thought about Penny's braids. I thought about Max's clip-on tie. I thought about a typed list with my children's names on it. I called the venue. I asked for the general manager by name. I had his name from the original contract correspondence. He came on the line quickly, which told me the coordinator had probably already flagged something. I identified myself, gave him the contract reference number, and told him I had been denied entry to an event I had personally contracted and paid for, and that a restriction had been added to the guest file without my knowledge or consent that specifically excluded my minor children. I told him I had photographic documentation. I told him I was invoking the material alteration clause in the contract. There was a long pause. He said, "Ms. I need to verify a few things. Can I put you on hold for 2 minutes?" I said yes. He was back in 4. He said, "I've reviewed the contract. You are listed as the sole contracting party. The restriction was added this morning by someone who identified themselves as the bride." He paused again. "Given the circumstances you've described and the documentation you've mentioned, I'm prepared to honor your request. We would need to begin the process of clearing the venue. I said, how quickly? He said they could have the property cleared within the hour. The catering team was still on site. He'd need to notify them. There would be a full refund to the card on file. I said, please proceed. I hung up. My hands were completely steady. I don't know why that surprised me. What happened inside that venue over the next 45 minutes, I only know from what I was told afterward. The music stopped mid-song, the catering staff began clearing food stations, the florist's team, contracted separately and not subject to my agreement, stayed, which created this strange half-decorated limbo. Guests were asked politely to make their way out. Theo was apparently near the altar when the announcement was made. Simone was still in the bridal suite. The person who called me was not Theo. It was his soon-to-be father-in-law, a man named Raymond, who had flown in from Atlanta for this wedding and whom I had met exactly once, briefly, at the engagement dinner. He called me from the parking lot with guests milling around behind him and said, in a very even voice, I just want to make sure I understand what happened. I told him. All of it, the restricted list. My children's names. The photo. The contract. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she added your kids to a restricted list. I said yes. He said, on the morning of a wedding you paid for. I said yes. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, I'm sorry this happened. I genuinely am. I think you did the right thing. He paused. I need to go have a conversation with my son. He hung up. His son, I later found out, had not known about the list. That is the part that I've sat with the longest. I still don't know entirely what to do with it. Theo didn't know. Or he says he didn't know. What I do know is that he also didn't call me. He didn't call me that day. He didn't call the next day either. Simone called. That evening, around 8 o'clock, while Max was in the bath and Penny was asleep in my bed because she'd asked to stay with me, my phone rang and it was Simone, and I answered it because I didn't know what else to do. She was not quiet. She was not professional. She said things I won't repeat in detail, but the substance was this. I had humiliated her. I had ruined the best day of her life. I had stolen from her. She used the word stolen. She said I had always been jealous of Theo's happiness, and this was proof of it. She said she was going to make sure everyone knew what kind of person I was. I let her finish. Then I said very calmly, I'd like you to think carefully before you tell that story to anyone, because I have a photo of that restricted list with my children's names on it, and I'm happy to share it with whoever you'd like. She hung up. Theo texted me 2 days later. It was a long text, 5 paragraphs. The first 2 were about how much he loved me and how he never wanted this. The third was about how Simone was going through a lot of stress and had acted out of fear. The fourth asked if there was any way to undo some of this. Specifically, he asked whether I could speak to the venue about releasing their date. The fifth said he hoped we could talk. I read it twice. I put my phone down. I picked it up again, typed 1 sentence, and sent it. I love you, but I need some time. I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks after that. When he finally called, we talked for almost 2 hours. It wasn't resolved. Those conversations never are, not really, not in one phone call. He told me Simone had admitted to adding the list. She'd told him she was worried the kids would be disruptive. She'd done it without telling him. I don't know what to do with the fact that he'd planned to marry someone capable of that decision. I don't know if he fully knows what to do with it either. What I know is this. The $45,000 is not coming back. Some of it was spent before the venue was ever booked. Most of it is gone. My accountant helped me pursue the business co-signer angle. My name is still on that lease in Denver, which means I have some legal leverage, but it's complicated and slow, and the honest truth is that I am not sure I want to spend what would be years in a legal fight with my own brother over money that came from my husband's death. Some mornings I am furious about that. Some mornings I am just tired. But I want to tell you the part that matters, because this is what I think about when the whole thing gets to be too heavy to hold at once. The drive home from Larkspur Ridge. Max had his clip-on tie in his lap, because I'd let him take it off. Penny woke up about 20 minutes into the drive and was disoriented and a little cranky. She asked me where the party was. I said, "We skipped it." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because sometimes plans change, and that's okay." She thought about this for a moment, the way 5-year-olds do when they're deciding whether or not to accept an answer. Then she said, "Can we get pancakes?" I laughed for the first time in what felt like a week. I said yes. We found a diner off the highway, sticky menus, the kind of syrup that comes in little plastic containers. A waitress who called Penny sweetheart and brought Max an extra strip of bacon without being asked. We sat in a booth for an hour. Penny got syrup on her yellow dress. Max talked about a video game for 20 solid minutes. I drank 2 cups of terrible coffee and felt, for the first time since the phone call about Scott's diagnosis, like I had done exactly the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the painless thing, but the right thing. I protected my kids. Not dramatically, not perfectly. I drove them to a place where their names were on a restricted list before I knew, and I will carry some guilt about that for a long time. But when I found out, I did not stand there and beg. I did not call Theo and plead for an exception. I did not minimize it or reframe it or tell myself it was a misunderstanding worth swallowing. I made a phone call. I used the only leverage I had, which was leverage I'd put in place not out of suspicion, but out of basic financial sense. And then I drove my kids to a diner and bought them pancakes. There is no tidy ending here. Theo and Simone did eventually get married. A small ceremony 3 months later, courthouse, family only. I was not invited, which I understood. We are speaking again, slowly, carefully. Some things have been said that needed to be said. Some things may never be fully repaired. Our mum has, predictably, opinions about all of it, most of them pointed in my direction. I have mostly stopped trying to explain myself to people who decided the version of this story that makes me the villain before they heard a word of it. What I have instead is this: Max, who is now in 2nd grade and has recently decided he wants to learn woodworking, which is its own particular irony. Penny, who still asks for pancakes at least twice a week and has no idea why that particular food makes me feel something I can't quite name. The knowledge that I am not easy to walk over, even when I love the person doing the walking, and a photograph, still in my phone, of a printed list with my children's names on it. I haven't deleted it. I'm not sure I ever will. Not because I want to stay angry. I don't, not really. But because some things need to be remembered clearly, without softening, without the revisionism that grief and family and time have a way of applying. My kids were on a restricted list at a wedding I paid for. I turned the car around. That's the whole story. I've thought a lot about the sequence of events that led me to that highway diner with my kids and 2 cups of bad coffee, and the thing I keep coming back to is this: nothing that happened was an accident. Not the way I structured the contracts. Not the way I said Theo's name on every agreement, 3 separate times in 3 separate conversations, making sure he understood that my name was on the paper. I didn't do that because I suspected something was wrong. I did it because I'd spent enough of my life watching money disappear into good intentions and coming out the other side with nothing but a lesson I hadn't asked for. What Simone did, typing my children's names into a restricted list on the morning of a wedding I had funded, was cruel in a specific, calculated way that I think she believed would have no consequences. She believed I would stand at that gate, feel the humiliation, swallow it, and go home quietly to avoid making a scene. She'd watched Theo's family long enough to know that we swallow things. We smooth things over. We tell ourselves it's fine because the alternative is conflict. And conflict is uncomfortable. And family is family. And you don't burn bridges over one bad day. She miscalculated one thing. She didn't know about the contracts. But I think, even beyond the legal piece, she miscalculated something more fundamental. She assumed that the version of me who had been absorbing things for years, the sister who sent money, the daughter who didn't push back, the widow who kept showing up, was the only version of me that existed. She thought compliance was my character. It wasn't. It was just what grief and exhaustion look like from the outside when a person is trying to hold everything together. The moment I saw Mac's name on that list, something reorganized itself inside me that I don't think will ever go back to the way it was. Not because of anger, though there was anger, but because I suddenly understood with absolute clarity what I was actually protecting and what I had been confusing with love for years. Love doesn't put a 7-year-old's name on a banned list. Love doesn't use a dead man's insurance money as emotional leverage. Love doesn't call at 8 o'clock at night and use the word stolen about a woman who drove an hour to watch her brother get married. What I'd been calling love, what Theo and my mother had trained me to call love, was actually just familiarity dressed up in obligation. The feeling that people who have known you your whole life are owed something permanent, something unconditional, something that doesn't require them to behave well in return. I don't believe that anymore. What I do believe, what that diner taught me, what Penny's syrup-stained yellow dress taught me, is that the clearest measure of your own integrity is what you do in the moment when it costs you something real. Not when it's easy, not when everyone is watching and there's applause available. When it's just you on the side of a highway with your kids in the back seat and a decision in front of you that will change things no matter which way you go. I made the call. I held the line. I bought pancakes. And whatever comes next, with Theo, with my mother, with all of it, I know exactly who I am. That's not a small thing. For a long time I wasn't sure.